in life, subjects aren't compartmentalized. You don't just have, oh, history's happening right now, math is happening right now, and history's over. That's not life. And so the projects bring all of these disciplines together just like life does.
What are some cool real-world experiences, professional experiences that teachers have had, because we have teachers who are coming from, other professions, not just coming into teaching.
Kind of the ideas can just kind of pop out of nowhere. But I think, again, going back to always thinking about where the students are coming from, and what's the exhibition going to look like? What are they going to perform at the end? What's the product going to be?
What scaffolds do they need to have throughout the project that's going to let them have as much freedom as they want to go with, but at the same time support them to the end point.
Planning is by far my favorite part of teaching, because it really combines the art and the science, and you get to be really creative. And if you were to come back to my house, you'd see tons of books all over my couch right now, because you get this idea, and then you take out your computer and you do some research, and you talk to your partner, and you talk to your mom, and you talk to your friends, and you get other people's ideas.
We have all of the teachers involved in the project planning, especially the initial stages, even if they're not involved in the project itself. If they're not having any part of the project happening in their classroom, it doesn't matter. They're still part of the discussion about the project at the very beginning stages, and then we'll come back to that group, the larger group, with drafts of what we're going to be doing with the students, and we get feedback. It helps the project itself, it helps the teachers that are in that project, but it also helps the teachers that are not involved in that particular project, because they're going to be going through the same process.
After you lay out the benchmarks and kind of like have a draft of it, like what activities will take place kind of like on a week-by-week basis, and then you kind of work through those, tasks. I mean, this is more simple than it actually is, but I think that's kind of the approach that I take in terms of starting the idea and drafting the actual project description for students. All the projects that I've seen that were executed well, they always kind of start with a essential question or some type of inquiry that needs to be answered. You want to come up with a question that it's not complicated literally, right?
It's interesting. There's not just one answer. I'm a math teacher, and often there's just one answer. So that's definitely something that I try and grab onto is, okay, are the kids going to be able to answer this in different ways, and is it going to be interesting to an audience when they do their presentation and exhibition?
Especially if you're working on an interdisciplinary project, you can answer the question through the lens of history, or you can answer the questions through the lens of science, or what have you. So one of our first essential questions of last year, working with 9th graders, was around identity. Who am I, and what experiences, what people, what events have shaped who I am? And they also looked at that in history, doing their own personal timelines, and they wrote narrative essays. So it was very open. When you've done it for many years, you can start thinking about your curriculum in terms of a whole essential question that you experience throughout the year. So with me, with the kids in English, they looked at who am I personally. Then they went to who am I and looking at identity issues from the character's perspective in Bless Me Ultima. And then we read Shakespeare and looked at, well, how do conflicts shape the plot and shape the characters and who they are and how they identify to each other. And it was seamless for the kids, and they understood why identity was so important, but also to themselves, but also important in history, in English, in other areas too.
One subtle and a simple thing that we have done in the past to launch a project is just to build anticipation. So the students know that we're working on planning the next project, and we purposely try to keep it under wraps.
Hook them in some way, whether it's through an interactive activity like
doing chalk talks around where they get to communicate with each other around a general question, and they run from poster to poster writing their ideas and challenging each other's ideas.
We did a gallery walk where there were images of apartheid South Africa, and the students didn't really know what we were studying, and they wrote down questions that they had about what was going on in the images.
We have them predict things and act lines out and what those lines mean.
Bringing in the models that the students are going to work towards. Their goal was to present and perform a creative monologue, and we used some footage from a professional performance, Anna Devere Smith Twilight Los Angeles, and that got the kids really excited because they could see where they were headed, and she was really, really good at it.
Experiences that I can always refer back to throughout the unit. And so anything that kind of elicits a reaction or gets them really engaged, I mean, that's what the hook is about. It's very messy, so you cannot be rigid, you have to be flexible, and you have to be willing to have people challenge you, teachers and students. And so all of that just is uncomfortable and it's messy.
You need to live it, and you need to really believe in it, and you work a lot, and it doesn't matter, right? Because you do care, and you see the change.
If I could just have one more week, that's all I need, and then it would be perfect. And that's one of the challenges that I feel that I face every time I do a project.
And the students will say the same thing. The students will want more time. There's never enough time. Another interesting challenge is just putting students in groups. You don't. It's an incredibly delicate and challenging activity to get the right students working together, resolving conflicts that you can imagine arise in groups of teenagers.
You doubt yourself at times, and that's really hard because you're really invested in this, and you might be 2 weeks away from exhibition, and there's no turning back. But what if everything that we've done in the past 6 weeks doesn't make any sense? And so, you doubt yourself, and that's where the camaraderie comes in, and that's where, you're not in this alone. So there's 3 other people who you do trust who would tell you if it didn't make sense because they're really smart and, they get it.
We present our projects as public exhibitions, so it opens your teaching to the public, and there's a fair amount of anxiety that produces in any teacher. So when it comes to exhibition night, we're just as nervous and anticipating what's going to happen as the students.
I remember after we did the fall exhibition, I had to figure out what I was feeling. I had to go home and sit there and write in my journal and be like, so what just happened? What's going on? Part of me wants to cry. Part of me wants to be very joyous, but part of me wants to just crash. And there's all these emotions that are going through you. And I think it helps being in the way we're set up as a school and a system of schools, because we get that.
And it's a lot of pressure, but it's one of those kind of things when they perform and it's over, it's so rewarding. I worked for several years in the technology industry, and I did projects regularly in my professional life, so I got to see how important it was to be able to do things like work with people, to organize yourself, plan things out before you do them, kind of have a vision of what you're going to do, and all those kinds of challenges that our students get to do in high school. Now it's extremely challenging for adults to do it, and so it's as challenging for students to do it as well. But I like to help them develop those skills as a young person.
I think a lot of teachers like learning, and so this makes it possible to continue learning as you're teaching. There's no way I could be teaching history for the next 30 years of my life. There's no way that if I continue to work on projects, it's going to become boring, predictable, traditional in terms of that's my routine, that's what I do.
Once you explain the project and you get them going on it, you can't just stay in one part of the room. And as you go around and talk to all the kids, you get to learn all these nuanced things that you wouldn't know if you just stood up in front of the classroom and lectured. And I think in those ways and through those small conversations, as a teacher, you're able to convey what you care about in terms of them as a person and them as a learner.
From personal experience, as a math teacher, I think that math is everywhere, and in lots of places in the world, but you learn new things dealing with a humanities teacher or a art teacher or somebody out of your discipline that you sometimes don't think of.
The fact that the projects are interdisciplinary means that the students are making these connections across subject areas that in traditional schools are constantly separated or always separated. And in life, subjects aren't compartmentalized. You don't just have, history's happening right now, math is happening right now, and history's over. That's not life. And so the projects bring all of these disciplines together just like life does.
And project-based learning, it works, right? And so you want to empower students, and this is a way to empower them because they feel like they're learning. It's not summer camp, it's hard, and it takes a lot of brain power, but they know they're learning, and they can come back to it, years and years later, and they got it. It didn't just disappear like a fact that they memorize. It lives in them.